Welcome to our Going Green podcast. We're going to today have a look at the Beijing Olympics. They're basically said to be now the first 100% renewable green Olympic Games.
No. They said to be the 100%
In a
sustainable,
100% sustainable,
as
yes.
opposed to being anything else.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the other Olympics have been actually quite green in what they've intended to try and do, that they have tried to sort of have a go at doing that. And Beijing have been trying quite hard. They've said that they're now using 100% renewable electricity
Power the
to power everything.
Yeah.
And that includes doing nasty things like, how much snow have they got there at the moment?
Depends what you mean. Do you mean
Real, natural, genuine snow? Yeah.
The answer is a zero. But the problem is because they're doing it in a place that has rainfall of approximately 1 millimeter a year. And
it's pretty low, isn't it? I know that.
It's
Yeah.
low, yeah, exactly. And so, you're sort of asking the question of, we need snow to ski on or to do our winter sports on, because that's what, basically ice. And yet you come to a place that has no ice because it's a drought-ridden desert, or at least parts of it.
So what they've done, they've taken a huge sort of lake somewhere, and they've brought the water in, and then they've got lots of snow machines, and these snow machines, which were actually used in the last two Olympics quite a lot.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, so in 2014 in Sochi, which was a Russian the Winter Olympics, they used approximately, it was something like 80% artificial snow. That was just a top on their very little, because they have very little snow during that season. Fair enough, that's no problem. Then Pyeongchang Olympics, which was in 2018, happened, and they also recorded a very low amount of snow in the area, so they had to use 90% artificial snow in their, I say, resorts, or where the locations are happening, to apply enough snow for all the things happening. Now, Beijing, unfortunately, has to use 100%, because unlike the other two places where they had low, say, snow forecasts, and amounts of snow or precipitation, Beijing receives zero all year round in this zone. So they had to use the artificial snow. They had to use 100% of it, because, of course, they don't get any of it. So if they wanted the Winter Olympics, they needed this. Now, there's an argument to say that it's actually the Olympic Committee's fault for choosing Beijing to host the Winter Olympics, because, of course, it's not really a place that has Winter Olympics, or is not suitable for it. There is no ice, there is no snow, there are all these things. It's sort of, it's lacking in its Winter Olympic ability. You are sort of, can it hold major Olympics, main Olympics, the Summer Olympics essentially, and the answer is it's no problem. It's fine for that. It's the winter ones that require the ice and snow, and you sort of go, this isn't any ice and snow to put on and use it. So, so anyway, but that's the Olympic.
So they've got to use snow machines to do this.
Yeah.
But they've also done really well. They have actually repurposed lots of their other buildings. You've been watching the curling, which has been taking place in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like a swimming pool to me. It looks like sort of a nice sort of repurposed building. And their velodrome is now for the speed skating rather than bicycles. And they've done really quite well on doing that. They've repurposed the buildings. They've made them have another use. Now, whether they can go back to what they were, that I don't know. But there wasn't much said about that. It was just that they can now use those buildings for something else. They've repurposed them. And that's quite sensible, really. They're not sort of building new buildings, because the Olympics isn't just about really this sort of idea of having power and sort of everything being green. It's sort of, well, it's everything about it, isn't it? It's the building and of everything to start with.
Well, yeah, so they had to come up with a pre-report saying whether or not they could actually hold the Olympics and sort of gauge all that. But it's one of those things where yes, they did use all these buildings and all these things, which is fair enough. That's great. That's fantastic in regards to its sustainability. You know, they said they were going to use all these facilities, allow for like I say, the public, the people to actually engage in these Winter Olympic sports over the period of whilst they're not active. That's the wrong way to put it, but they've just built them, they've got them ready. Instead of just throwing them away, they're going to keep them there for a while, probably for 6 months, maybe even a year, to engage people in Winter Olympic sports.
Yeah, that sounds a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. One of the major complaints athletes have been complaining about, and it's not just athletes, it's also people watching it. They've been complaining that they watch the Winter Olympics, they expect all the nice mountainside scenery and things, and all they met on TV is it's being held in the industrial parks. It's being held in basically, not very, I wouldn't say picturesque, but it's not their view of what an Winter Olympics should look like, which is, is engaging sort of, this is probably more the future than anything else. So you're looking at sort of, changing attitudes. Yes, it was a decision made, and it was sort of, it's presenting this idea that just because a Winter Olympics doesn't have to be, it isn't in the mountainside, doesn't mean it can't take place. And that's great, and that's fantastic. Sort of changing, which is why I think they went for it. But it does bring the back to sort of the problems of holding the Winter Olympics in a place that doesn't do winter, or at least winter in relation to what for the last 60 years has been declared as winter.
Yeah. So let's take a little look at the power for a moment. So this part of China has actually more renewable energy than sort of most countries in the world. And they've pioneered this new green electric grid to deliver power to this sort of large area. So everything here is all powered by renewable electricity. They started preparing for all this, and I think they've actually done pretty well, really. They worked out the venues were going to require an enormous 400 gigawatt hours of electricity.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
And that's equivalent to what the annual electricity consumption of, I had to look it up, 180,000 households.
Yeah.
So that's doing pretty well.
What else they're doing? They've got sort of something daft like 370 electric vehicles running around transporting all the athletes all over the place, which is powered by this grid. So it is, it's one of the things where they've attempted to actually commit to being 100% sustainable. It is, you can see the commitment is there.
And they've more than got that, because they've also got a hydropower station nearby with a total of about 2,500 terawatt hours, and that's basically more than enough to cover what the Olympics are going to actually use. So that's great. So they've used all these things that are going to be happening, and the Chinese government have worked on a long-term plan to sort of make this dedicated power grid with 100% renewable target, and it looks like they're actually achieving that. And I was looking at things like when they put the energy in to sort of make the ice, that when you're making ice, you're taking sort of substance that's a reasonable temperature. You're making something cold, but to do that, you've also got to make something hot. So they're also then heating the spectators with that heat as well. So they're freezing the competitors and keeping the
Audience.
spectators warm.
Yeah, well, the other crucial thing about all this is because it's happening through a time through where there is a pandemic going around, so there aren't that many, I say, spectators watching all this. There are only the locals, and yeah, this is sort of the locals and the sports teams, families, and those sorts of things, and that's fabulous in returns to, I wouldn't say sustainability, but you're not having to build stadiums for people to sit and watch, or to stand and watch, or to be there. You've just got, basically they're allowed to compete, and you're now using all these lovely cameras and all the streaming online and through television. That's how people are watching it, as opposed to being there, which of course means I don't have to travel to China to go and watch.
Yeah.
I can go from and that's helping so much in the emissions of sort of transport, plane and those sorts of things.
Not so many planes.
And that's great. But it also doesn't affect the local economy. That's the wrong way to describe it. Because, of course, the Olympics are booms for local economies because of how much investment is being put in. And then they suffer because, of course, they don't have the tourists. Well, they also don't have all the trash generated by the tourists. It's one of those things where if they don't consume, they don't, make things, and it's sort of one of those things, double-edged swords where, yes, they bring more money in, but of course the local areas have to spend more to clear up the mess. So it's sort of a lose-lose sort of thing, or a win-lose, or who knows what you want to call it. But having this all online, all this through TV, not having the spectators or the spectators, and I'll get it right, not around, shows that sort of it is this sort of much cleaner, I wouldn't say less efficient, but sort of you've only got to heat the small amount of spectators as opposed to huge swathes of people.
Yeah.
So the heat obviously generated can be used efficiently. So I think it's more, instead of being sustainable, it's more about efficiencies rather than anything else.
Yeah, they've also made this new green electricity grid, which they said is a flexible green electricity grid, and it's supposed to be the first of its kind to actually use DC. Now, I'm a great fan of if you've seen my videos on the national grid, and we use here AC because basically we take in a low voltage that is made by the power station. We up it to a very high voltage to transmit it, whereas the Chinese are using sort of DC to do all the movements, and they say it's better for long distance transmission, which I'm not so sure on, but I'll accept that they have got that working, and they've got it sort of doing things. So they've got all DC moving round, and they're sending it sort of
anyway.
Well, loads of miles, yes.
Where it is, but it's also the fact, of course, in relation to how do you generate AC? Because most power stations, they generate DC. Then they had to convert it into AC, and then when it comes to your house or wherever you need it, you have to go from AC back to DC.
Yes, I think DC is more useful really than AC. AC is traditionally used in this country and quite a few other countries on grids for moving the electricity around by sort of basically upping the volts, lowering the amps, and it's the amps that sort of generate all the sort of the heat. So you're getting rid of those, and that's quite good, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they've done this innovation, and for the purpose of making it better, and they've actually worked and thought about it, as opposed to just doing something for the sake of it. That's the real crux of the matter. Is yes, it happened, but it more happened because they were like, let's think about it. It's it's all right. It's a decent idea. It's not necessarily one that most people have chosen, but they've done it because it suited them. That's fine, and they're using it or pivoting it in their sustainability part of the games.
Of course, this grid can then be sort of put onto their normal sort of electrical grid, where they're mostly powered by, in fact, coal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, China does have one of the world's largest solar wind sort of production systems. Yet they've also got some of the world's largest and amounts of coal because fired power stations, simply because China uses up so much energy, and they need all sorts to try and do that. So China's still got this dependence on coal, and that's only going to stop. They're hoping to sort of stop the rise in the next few years.
Yeah, they've only committed to not building any new coal power stations by 2030. But only they said they phase it down by 2060, which unfortunately that's their goals. They have made the goals, so you can't say they haven't, and they are moving towards it. This flexible grid is a starting point to move on to, and that's fair enough.
And when the Olympic Games are finished, this green grid will transmit somewhere in the region of about 14 terawatts of renewable energy to Beijing every year, which is sort of 10% of the electricity consumption of China's capital, which sort of is a lot, but it still gives you an idea that it's a huge amount. I was looking at a nice little picture of a little village in China, and they have basically a mountainside which is sort of literally just covered in solar panels, producing a lot of electricity. Of course, the big problem is still with renewables that doesn't work at night.
Well, yeah,
And it certainly doesn't work when the wind doesn't blow for the wind turbines.
yeah, and you've got those standard problems. But the other major point is they're reusing land that isn't or not terribly useful. Where they're putting it is pretty much in a desert. High in the mountains, so there's nothing grows there. But there is a major, or should I say, minor problem with what they've done. Is the fact that where they're doing some of these things is all this artificial snow is going in, right? What else is in the artificial snow? There's
a long pause there. Well, I just thought snow was snow.
How nature makes snow, usually around a piece of dirt or dust.
Yeah.
And then it forms the ice crystal around it. Anyway.
And that's quite nice and soft and fluffy, isn't it? Sort of, I was talking to someone earlier today, and you were telling me that ordinary snow is mostly air.
Yes. Whereas, unfortunately, their artificial one, it's more ice than air. So it's 30% ice and 70% air. Whereas nice fluffy white snow, that is only 10% ice and 90% air. So it is a problem, and athletes have actually complained about this, and it's one of those things where one athlete says it's fantastic, one athlete said it's bad. The reason they say it's good is because on the sort of the freestyle skiing, those sorts of things, because it's less air, it's also less grippy, so it's more slippery, which means they can skeet and they can get more speed, so they can do higher tricks and flips and all sorts of things. And that's wonderful for them, because obviously that's what they're... However, in relation to if you fall off it, because it's harder, because there's not this white fluffy snow that has a lot of air. It's this quite hard thing,
More compacted
more
snow, yeah.
compacted snow or artificial snow. It means that if you do fall and hurt yourself, the injuries caused is actually more, because it's, it's sort of the difference between hitting a nice foam thing or a floor, or a hard floor. Your foam is going to compress and allow you to not injure yourself as much as on the hard floor. So, there is this sort of two-way battle between wanting artificial snow because it allows for faster speeds, as opposed to the risk and safety to the athletes.
Yeah.
An argument to be made. Now, what I was actually going back onto about this snow, the artificial snow uses things like salt and fertilizer, or at least fertilizer-based materials, to produce the snow. This is the things to make sure it doesn't melt, preserve it, and keep it. I wouldn't say lush. That's the wrong way to put it, but keep it.
Yeah, you don't have lush snow, Paul.
No, you is the answer is to keep it sort of clean and sort of white, essentially, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
And that you sort of go, great, fair enough. Now, what happens when all this artificial goes away?
Well, surely you're going to be left with all the other materials. So the ice is going to basically sublime, and you're going to be left with the salt and the fertilizers and the other chemicals all left coating everything.
Yeah, the water's gonna, all the ice is gonna run off, and basically all this bad chemical stuff is gonna fall into the ground source of the water in the environment, and basically make something. Admittedly, nothing much grows there. They're gonna basically,
but even less will grow afterwards.
Exactly. So it's one of those things. However, that's not quite the point. Where they're doing some of the sports, say like the alpine skiing,
and that's in a steel plant, isn't it?
No,
I thought that's the ski jump. The ski jump is in a steel plant. Yes.
The alpine skiing, which is actually in the mountainside, as in much further away than anything else, because they needed cold outdoor temperatures as opposed to just requiring snow.
Yeah,
because obviously that's what they wanted. They went into a wood preserve or a conservation area, and they cut down approximately 80% of the trees there. They did say that, or something. No, I don't think. No, I'll get my facts right. They cut down a huge swath of trees, something like 20,000 trees. They said they will replant 80% of them. That's where my number's from. But of course, you've already got this ground source water in the way. So will those trees actually grow there? They'll have to be grown elsewhere.
Yeah.
So you've already damaged the ecosystem. This which isn't, has its problems in regards to, it's not very, it's not very good in sort of it doesn't rain that much and those sorts of things. You're gonna drop lots of water, but it's all poisonous, and so you're not gonna you reduce this natural, I say beauty or wonder. You've reduced this conservation area down, and so yes, you will increase it, but you're not increasing it where it was. You've just created basically a large black area on them.
Yeah. I think the major complaints about all this Olympics is basically the typical Chinese thing. It's the lack of transparency. They may well be doing lots of really good things or not, but it's just basically people don't know about them, isn't it? This is one of the big problems.
Yeah. And it's not the fact that they don't know about them, it's more the fact that sort of you do all this eco, and yet they still do all the coal power plants. It's sort of not two-faced, if that makes any sense. It is the fact that sort of, they're not a country that has snow. They've got imported winter artificial snow. You see, it's sort of, why were they chosen for being a winter sport when they're not considered in the winter's area. But it's one of those odd things that sort of say where it is that niggling argument, sort of, is it technically a Winter Olympics? Because
Yeah.
they've used artificial snow, and it is in winter time in the Northern Hemisphere, but they're mostly, using 100% artificial snow. Olympics or Winter Olympics requires cold temperatures. Now,
Yeah, but I wouldn't suggest we actually move the Winter Olympic Games to somewhere like Antarctica, which does have cold temperatures, does have snow all the year round, but I really wouldn't fancy having an Olympic Village in Antarctica.
no, and I'm not suggesting doing that. It's one of the things where there was a report a few years ago that's saying that sort of 14 out of, or half or something, a percentage over half or near enough of previous Winter Olympic venues aren't able to hold the Winter Olympics due to the fact of it's all climate change, how much warmer everything is. Loads of places, are reporting, previous two Olympics, they had to use more artificial snow than they were expected because they were saying that there isn't enough snowfall that had happened, or even precipitation hadn't happened. So, you sort of say because of global warming, there is less places that are available to host the Winter Olympics. So, being things like Beijing could become the more normal, and in which case, then, not that it's we should hold it in colder places. It's more the fact that we need to preserve the colder places to allow Winter Olympics to happen there, which is a whole argument for, more climate change, or climate change prevention needs to happen. China's been very bad on it, so they need to be better. But hosting the Olympics is a challenging sort of, well, they have to be 100% sustainable. The games have to be 100%.
Yeah.
So you're sort of forcing China to be more eco-friendly to host the games. It's sort of, is that better, or than them letting them not host it?
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea, really. Yeah, we're all trying to get more green. We started off with the 1994 Winter Games were the first that were supposed to be green games, and gradually they're getting more and more green, repurposing and using sort of renewable power. As for where it's going to continue, well, that's anybody's guess, really, because we don't know the state of global warming and how it's going to get worse. We can only presume that it will do. So there we are, the Olympic Games. We've had a quick look at some of that. Do we think they're green? I think we can. I think we can say that they are green. They've tried, they've repurposed, they've used renewables, they've used electric vehicles. They've certainly tried. Only time's going to tell whether they're actually going to put it back, and really whether, we can look back in about 4 years' time, 5 years' time, and you'll look and say, yes, it was green, or, well, no, it wasn't as green as, it was advertised.
Yeah. That's unfortunately what we have to do.
So thank you very much for listening to our Going Green podcast, looking at the Olympics. We've survived sitting in Storm Dudley.
Yes.
And we apologise for any extra noises you heard, because that's the wind. We will see you next week if we survive Storm Eunice.
Yes.
And that's the next one we've got coming in. And so until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.